Hey y'all! My southern accent is coming out in force today. I mean, all y'all know that I'm from North Carolina, I grew up in Florida, and so even during the meditation, I heard my southern twang in my head, which I think is pretty interesting. Welcome everyone to Sunday, and this is a special Sunday I got for many of us. And I think the right, perfect opening prayer, thank you for that. Joe, thank you for what you shared about today being about tolerance and love, and these songs that are just perfect if you felt and heard the words. Just take a deep breath. As sometimes happens, a moment settles and hovers and remains for much more than a moment. And sound stops and movement stops for much, much more than a moment. Now that's actually a quote from John Steinbeck. And for me, it truly represents the wholeness of the day. We were all connected to one moment. Indeed, a decade ago, it felt like the world stopped turning. It felt like sound stopped and movement ceased. What I found extraordinary is that globally, individuals, you and I, we became one as our differences really didn't seem so important anymore. Our hearts, our spirit, we were connected. What I also find extraordinary is that we don't just remember the general physical location of where we were on Tuesday, September 11, 2001. We know with certainty if we were sitting or standing, what the weather was like, which by the way was exactly like today, what clothes we were wearing. We remember feeling the goosebumps peppering our arms and that feeling of the hair in the backs of your neck when it stands up on end. We remember the sound and smells in our immediate area. And although it has been a decade since that tragic day, we're able to close our eyes and relive that moment because it defined and transformed so much in our lives moving forward. And let's think about that. So many people experienced survivor's guilt, regardless of if they knew victims. Some decided to let go of their divine dreams and ideas and goals because it felt really selfish to want more from life when so much life had been lost. And then, of course, there were people that said, where the hell was God? How did God let this happen? And so many people walked away from their spiritual journeys and from their religious organizations. Now, what makes my talk unique today, and if you didn't get the email, it's Healing and Transformation, Spiritual Lessons and Growth a Decade Later. What makes it unique is that this is very much a personal story for me. And even as I wrote it, the more I thought about it, I said, you know what? As much as this is my personal story, many of you, if not all of you, will connect, and it's your story too. Now, on 9/11, I was 33. I owned a consulting firm in Manhattan, and I lived 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center. My life was in transition. I was experiencing, you name the self-doubt, I had it. Self-doubt, unhappiness, unfulfillment, emptiness. When I look back on it now, I was very much disconnected from my truth and from God. Now, I loved being an entrepreneur, loved it. I just didn't love my business partners. I would daydream. I was daydreaming for months, this idea that they were going to buy me out and that I was going to start this personal journey for my life purpose. And then, of course, my boyfriend and I of 6 years at the time, we broke up 2 weeks prior, and I was set to move to the Upper West Side of Manhattan on September 12th. Now, the morning of September 11th, it was about 8:40, I was running late. Just as I was going to get to the World Trade Center to grab the E-train, a voice inside of me said, Michelle, you need to go back home. You forgot your cell phone. Now, I forget my cell phone all the time, and it's like, you can dial in and listen to voicemail, but there was something about that voice, and I listened. The stubborn Irish-Italian girl said, okay, I'm going to go back home and get my cell phone. And as I got to my building, there was this very eerie silence and stillness that was interrupted by a roar and what sounded like shattering glass and screeching metal. And after spinning around in circles for a while, not knowing where to look, I finally looked toward the sky where many people on the street were pointing, and I saw the smoke coming out of the North Tower. So what did I do? I ran into my building, I took the elevator to the rooftop deck. Had to get a closer look, and there were actually already about 20 people there, and we all just stood there and wondered out loud what in the hell happened. It had to be a helicopter, it had to be a small plane. Certainly this was an accident. Something mechanical went wrong to explain what we were seeing. And if you remember the pictures, and I know you do, there were the papers and the debris that were floating out of that hole. And then a short time later, there were larger, heavier objects that fell spastically. And I went numb, and I wouldn't allow my brain to acknowledge that those heavier objects were people. Because if I did, that meant this whole thing was real, and then I had to start questioning how would God let this happen. Now, at that point, I realized I still didn't have my cell phone, and that my family was probably panicked and wondering what the heck is going on, was I okay? Now, I've now lived in Manhattan 15 years, and one of the things that I do find extraordinary about New Yorkers is that we don't know our next door neighbors' names. We don't know, but we'll acknowledge each other in the elevators, and we're getting the mail, and we'll nod and smile. But let me tell you something, on that rooftop deck, we were physically and emotionally leaning on each other. We had hands on each other's backs or on our shoulders in support. Familiar faces, didn't know their names, but there was this unspoken connection, this powerful connection. My heart was in direct alignment with theirs. That's God. Whether we were conscious of it or not, that's God. Now, as I was going to grab the elevator to get to my apartment, that's when that second commercial airliner sliced into the South Tower. And there were screams around me and within me. And so instead of the elevator, I ran down 14 flights of stairs, grabbed my cell phone, grabbed my dog. And again, that voice said, Michelle, you need to close your windows, because again, like today, it's beautiful. So I'm closing all the windows, and you would think Michelle would have exited the building, but guess where Michelle went? She went back up to the roof. Yeah. Now, at that point, there are now about 100 people, handful of dogs and the building manager, and we're all just trying to figure out what's going on, and everybody had their cell phone out. Most people were frustrated because theirs wasn't working. I had about 20 missed calls, most of which were from my mom. And by God's grace, we connected. And I will tell you this, my cell phone worked the entire day. And the cell battery never died. Those of us who had working phones handed them to those who did not, so that they could reach their loved ones. And I will tell you, nobody was worried about minutes, no one was worried about roaming charges, no one was worried about international calling. That's God in action. All the building manager wanted was us to get off the roof and into our apartments. And as he was begging, that's when the rumbling started, and the sirens grew louder, and we heard voices shouting that the South Tower's coming down. And it was this implosion that you only have seen in the movies, and you can't believe that it's happening, and this thick smoke just waves into the sky. Now, we had 100 plus people, dogs. We got off that roof so quickly and without injury. Everyone made sure that people could get to safety, and were helping people get down the stairs. And a group of us reached out to the management company and said, what can we do to help? And we started running around, letting ourselves into apartments, checking on people, closing windows, and gathering pets. And while we were trying to organize our building, that's when the North Tower collapsed. Now, I was standing in the lobby at that point, and when I looked out into John Street, it might as well have been midnight. You couldn't see anything. And then people started coming in to find shelter. And you know those big water dispensers that usually receive this? We were emptying gallon after gallon, helping people clean their eyes, giving people drink, clearing wounds. And I realized, you know what? It's time to evacuate and get to a safer place. Whatever the hell that meant, I didn't know. But again, my cell phone was working. My friends who lived on the Upper West Side were leaving me messages saying, head north. So I went upstairs, I grabbed a backpack, I threw in bottles of water, a flashlight, 2 bandanas, one for me and one for my dog, who was very good and didn't argue with her mom. She tied this bandana around her muzzle. She kind of knew that, hey, something's going on and I'm just going to listen. It took me an hour just to get oriented once I got outside. The bandanas were pretty much useless. My eyes were burning, I'm zigzagging, and like I said, it took a while for me to even realize if I was going in the right direction. Now, in that time, myself and many others were stopping in the storefronts and lobbies and delis and restaurants so we could clean out our eyes and drink some water and clean out those bandanas. Nobody turned anybody away. That's God in action. Once we got to an area that was a little bit clearer, people who had cars that could actually move were rolling down their windows and asking, how can we help? Do you need to rest? Here's my car. Can I drive you somewhere? Buses stopped for everyone until they were bursting at the seams. As I continued on my journey north, wait staff, families in buildings, deli owners were bringing out food and water on the sidewalks. It was extraordinary. And they say that New Yorkers, people who live in New York are nasty. They're so wrong. By 4 p.m. I reached my friends, and when I tell you I was covered in dirt and cement, it's an understatement. And I walked into the Gap on 68th and Broadway, and it was empty except for the store manager. And he came up to me and he said, just like arms open, he goes, what can I do to help you? And I was like, and I finally allowed myself to cry, and I'm like, this is all I got. This is it. And wouldn't you know, there was this sale at the Gap that day. Buy one pair of socks, get 7 free. I'm not kidding. 80% off of shirts, 95% off of jeans. And he put together this care package for me that would last me a couple of weeks, because nobody at that point knew when we were going to get back down there. That's God in action. Now, I'm sure I'm not alone when I say that I didn't sleep that night. Right? I didn't sleep for days. And I couldn't let go of that anger. I'm angry and feel a tremendous amount of hate that I'm expressing toward those that have tremendous amounts of hate, that felt that their way to express it was this tragedy. Now, isn't that interesting? Because I wasn't owning up to mine. I just wanted to know, how can anyone hate like that? And I was living right up to it. When I look back on that now, I think, what was I contributing to the human, not spiritual, the human consciousness in our planet on that day? Because, again, at the time, I really didn't have, I wasn't on my spiritual journey yet. It was kind of just starting. And I didn't realize that I am a spiritual being first and foremost. Now, it would take 2 weeks before I could get back downtown to my apartment to pack up so I could officially move. I had a huge terrace, about half the size of this room actually. And it was filled with office furniture, files from companies that were in the World Trade Center, frames of families and children, as well as cement and dirt and ash. And while I was cleaning, packing, I found my planner. And many of you probably have that planner, that organizer, where you are creating and writing down the life that you want. Your divine dreams and your ideas and your goals, what you want from love and friendship and relationships, what you want from your career, what you want from a business. I had in this planner all my talents, these gifts, these skills that I was going to tap into finally and explore. And at the time, my start date was September 12th. Now, think about it for a moment. We started today with this beautiful meditation. When we meditate and pray, that's when divine ideas come up, because we are connected with our one and only source, and that's God. Make no mistake, I am now aware that everything in that journal, everything in that organizer came from God, just like your divine ideas. dreams and goals come from? The spiritual center. It's God. God wants one idea. So I looked at that organizer and I threw it away in the trash with the other debris because I felt very selfish and unappreciative of the life I had prior to 9/11 and since 9/11. How dare I want more out of life when so much life had been lost? Why couldn't I just be happy? Now here's what's interesting, and again, this is why we look back a decade later, because I can look back on that now, and there was a whole lot of Italian guilt going on in my head. Because you see, my saying, who am I to want more? That era of thinking, that happened before 9/11. And I'm sure all of us, when we aren't following our divine path, that's era of thinking, and that's ego talking. But I did. I tossed it away. And my ego, I got a very creative and active ego when it wants to kick in. And it started revealing all sorts of mental clutter and realizations like, you know what, Michelle, you're alive. Your family and friends are alive. It would say, you know what? So your business partners suck. Who cares? You know what? So they're not pulling their weight, they're taking advantage of you. Could be worse. So the relationship with your ex-husband wasn't 100%, ex-boyfriend wasn't 100% fulfilling and was 100% dysfunctional. Could be worse. It was a dynamic that you understood. You knew how to relate in it. And you know how many people are single out there? Again, are these the kind of thoughts that are just reserved for a day of tragedy? No. These are ego thoughts that pepper us throughout the day when we have that disconnect. And so, what did I do? I continued to own a business I didn't want. I said yes to people when I meant no. Anyone relate to that? And I took back my ex-boyfriend. When I said ex-husband earlier, it's because I ended up marrying him. Because look at what happened. Life's too short. What I also did is I ignored that still small voice, spirit, that was saying, Michelle, your life was meant to be lived big. Your life was meant for a greater purpose. I pushed it away. And here's what I can tell you with 100% certainty, and what I know to be true. The Spirit never leaves us. God doesn't leave us. It's not possible. We are one with God. It is eternal. Eternal means forever. But y'all, I am really good at the whole disconnect. I disconnected and I pushed my truth so far down. And then I built a brick wall on top of it. I made sure it was down there for a while. Anybody relate to that? Now, many lessons were learned from 9/11 around the world. Some of them were immediately felt and some were global. And some took months, if not years, to realize, and some of them are still happening for us as individuals. Each of us has a story from that day. Now, if we take the time to look at the person, the people we were a decade ago, and to see where we are now, we would have our aha moments of growth, of learning, lessons, transformation, and not just personal growth, but spiritual growth. But here's the thing, we have to be willing to look at our junk. Because as we are on our journeys, when we are guided by God on these journeys, stuff comes up that doesn't look or feel pretty. And it's got nothing to do with tragedy. Okay? Sometimes we will use a sad event, a tragic event, for self-sabotage. Anybody here ever self-sabotage? Right, y'all have. I have. We don't need tragedy to disconnect from God either, because we've all done that. We did it before 9/11, we've done it since 9/11. We need to be willing to look at it. Because here's the thing, that's actually part of our journey. The icky gunky stuff that comes up, the obstacles and the blocks and the fears and the painful moments. You know why they show up? Because you're ready to be healed. Sometimes just a part of it, sometimes a big chunk of it, and sometimes all of it. And if we embrace God, divine love, that wisdom, that strength, that is guiding us toward this healing, not away from it. And we need to recognize that, and I use the word honor, sometimes that freaks people out. Honoring the icky-looking stuff doesn't mean we're validating it, but it doesn't mean we're giving it power. All it says is, you've shown up for a reason, and it's time God and I are going to figure out what that is. Now, I shared a lot of my story that day, and I know you all experienced stuff yourself, you witnessed stuff yourself, you saw things on the news. In the midst of death, destruction, and tragedy, I personally witnessed love, humanity, grace, and generosity from a diverse group of people. Not just from my community and from my city, but internationally. That's God. Everything I shared with you, that's divine love in action. We've heard stories of the self-sacrifice, the first responders, the rescue dogs. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that book that just came out dedicated to the rescue dogs of 9/11. People of all ages giving back. I witnessed little girls doing lemonade stands, and money was going toward the families. That's God in mind. God did not leave us on that island. He was there. Or she was there. We'll say he, she. Now, one of the lessons that I've learned over the years, and it probably did start with 9/11, is that the universe does not present us with challenges that we are not strong enough to face and to work through. Because guess what? And you've heard me talk about this before. We were born with this awesome power called choice. And we get to choose how we receive and how we react to moments in our life, which includes tragic events like 9/11. Now, in my case, I chose to use 9/11 as a scapegoat. It was my scapegoat so that I didn't have to move forward into all the scary unknown. I allowed myself to accept less and believe that I was less than. I allowed that guilt. Who am I to want more? How many of you have ever experienced that limited emotion? And again, I remind you, it's not reserved for tragedy. I've experienced it a month ago. It happens. And when does it happen? It's those moments when we are separated from God and ego takes over. And let me tell you a little thing about ego. Ego doesn't just show up to fill our mind with clutter during hard moments. It's an equal opportunity offender. It will show up whenever it feels like it is not going to be paid attention to much longer. Now, gratefully, I realized after several years that I didn't have to stay stuck in a life that didn't serve me. Because what I love about Spirit is she's a gentle nudger. And she pokes. And she's like, I'm here. And I'm not going away. At some point, you're going to recognize me. And as many of you know, and you've watched me growing, I am now married to the love of my life. And we are expecting our first child in fall. And I did sell my company, and I did create a life that I love, and that is fulfilling. Because what I realized, my way of thinking was that God wanted us to suffer, that God punishes. Because that's the religion I was raised in. And then he makes an Italian-Irish guilt, and it's stronger. But I realized God created us to shine. He wants us to shine. If he didn't, he wouldn't have blessed us with spiritual tools like the power of choice and love and life. He wouldn't bless us with divine skills and talents and qualities that are meant to be utilized. They are meant to be honored and utilized. Are you utilizing yours? You are you guys in here. Poster child right here. As I said, you were meant to shine. And so here's what I want you to do right now is I want you to look at your neighbor. Look them in the eye. And if there's, feel free to get in the threesome. That sounded really awesome. Happy Sunday. Look at your neighbor. And I want you to say to your neighbor, you are meant to shine.
You are meant to shine. We're meant to shine, buddy.
You are meant to shine.
You are meant to shine.
Oh boy, I saw some of you go like this. Nope, I know she's going to make me do something else. Now, I want us to affirm together. I am meant to shine. Okay, all right. We're doing it again. And we are going to do the time again. Are we ready? So, you know, September 11th challenged faith for many of us. It certainly did me. Because back then, I believed that faith was something that was external. It was attached to a person, a thing, an object. And what I know now to be the truth is that faith is a spiritual power that is innate in everyone. And it gets activated when we believe and know to be true that God is our one and only source, that one and only power, and He is what manifests good in our lives. Now, I'm going to offer up a challenge to you all, because I like doing that too, is this week, take a moment to look at your story. Go back a decade to see where you were then, and see where you are now. And celebrate. I mean celebrate the good stuff, because you've had good stuff. You haven't just had good stuff, you've had awesome stuff. And then, I want you to love the stuff that by appearances didn't look so sexy, because that was a part of the journey too. And I want you to see and feel and remember, and here's the catch. If you are not happy with where you are right now, if you are not happy with your life's dash, which is that precious time between when we arrive and when we transition, guess what, y'all? You do not have to stay stuck in it. God doesn't want that for anyone. How cool is that? Especially for those of us that grew up thinking the other. So, look at it. And love yourselves. And be gentle with yourselves. And if you would allow me, I'd like to just do a quick prayer for protection. So if you would close your eyes. When I got here this morning, the prayer chaplain and I were in the kitchen. And I started talking about the light of God. And we hear about the light of God. The light of God is in each and every one of us. Make no mistake about it. The light of God is within you, and it is seen, and it is felt, especially when you are courageous enough to tap into it and say, here I am. Just like a lighthouse. Think about a lighthouse. Lighthouses are placed strategically as a way to guide people into safety. We are lighthouses for the world. We are connected. Our light radiates and bounces off of each and every person. Let us start today, as Joe shared in the beginning. This is about love and patience, about tolerance, about knowing that it's not just that we are meant to shine, the world is meant to shine. And I'm going to leave you with the prayer for protection, which comes from Unity and was written by James Dillett Freeman. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Namaste. Thank you guys. Thank you.